Republican State Legislator Matt Shaheen of Plano, thank you so much for joining us. This is the first day of the legislative session, and I'm just wondering, it's obviously going to look and feel a lot different because of the pandemic. So, what did you have to go through this morning, and how are you and your office operating?
Well, thanks for having me on, Jack. Yeah, things are a little different from 2 years ago when we kicked off the 86th legislative session. Things are a lot different. If you walk through the Capitol, everybody has a mask on. There's a significant amount of law enforcement presence as well. I just got tested moments ago. I tested negative. My family and I did, so we'll be able to participate in the opening ceremonies.
And are you satisfied with the protocols that have been put in place to keep lawmakers and their staffs and the public safe?
Yeah, right. It's really important during a legislative session that we interact with our constituents, the public. We're here for 140 days to make law. And so that interaction with our constituents and the public is vitally important. But we've put protocols in place so that we can do that in a very safe manner. So everybody has a mask on, there's social distancing. People that come to testify in committee hearings will be a little bit more spread out, but we're going to do it in a very safe place. The Texas Capitol is probably going to be one of the most safest places in our entire state.
And talking about safety, security obviously is top of mind given what happened last week at the Capitol with the violent siege. And I'm wondering, what are you seeing around the Capitol today as far as increased security is concerned?
Yeah, there's quite a bit of increased security that we see than normal. There's a significant amount of state troopers, both regular uniform and in fatigues, that are stationed across the inside of the Capitol as well as on the Capitol grounds. There's several hundred inside and outside of the Capitol. So, if people want to come and protest and make their voices heard, they're welcome to do that always. They just need to do it in a peaceful manner, and hopefully that will be the case today.
And just your reaction on the increased presence of law enforcement and other security.
Yeah, it's a crazy time in our nation's history, and again, this just one of these times where it makes me feel so grateful for our law enforcement, the sacrifice. My family and I, as we were walking through the Capitol this morning, we walked by several of them, and we just thanked them for their service. They're here sacrificing themselves to make us safe, make the public safe as well. So glad they're here. My prayer is that they will not be needed and everything will be peaceful, and we'll get off to doing the people's business today.
As you know, the session starts at noon, and one of the first things right off the bat is the election of a new speaker. Yeah. The presumed speaker, Dade Phelan, looks to be like he's going to be voted in. Will you support him?
Absolutely. Dade is actually part of my class. So this will be our fourth term together. He's a great conservative out of Beaumont area, and he'll be a great speaker. I've probably talked to him about half a dozen times since my election back in November. He's going to be a good job. A good speaker is somebody that lets each of the representatives represent their districts, right? So as a body, we're obviously going to be focused on redistricting, and of course, electing a speaker today, and then the budget. And then after that, he's really going to leave it up to the body, the individual members, to drive the priorities of this session. And that's really shows a good speaker.
What are your legislative priorities this session?
Well, of course, it's going to get our economy back up and running. We had a great education session last session, so we want to keep that moving along and progressing as well. Education is so important for our state. Obviously, we have a gap as far as all these students that had to learn virtually. So we have to tackle that gap as well. And of course, the budget is going to be a big focus, big priority. We're going to have to make some difficult decisions as a state. And I think we're prepared to do that. We have about $1 billion deficit is what Glenn Hager, the comptroller, announced yesterday. We're blessed with the rainy day fund. And so Texas is a lot better positioned than a lot of other states from a fiscal perspective.
You mentioned public education, and yesterday the comptroller Glenn Hagar said that there will still be enough for the legislature to fulfill its commitments made last session, HB3. Any concerns that you have about that?
I think what we're going to do as a legislative body is we're going to fund our priorities, and education is top. If you look at The entire Texas budget of 250 billion, over 90 billion is education. And so we did make great strides last session with respect to education funding. And I think we're in a position to continue that. I think there's some other areas in the state budget where we're going to have to make cuts. One of the things that we can do as a legislative body is guide agencies to make investments in technology, process improvement, efficiencies to run their operations better at a lower cost. The private sector does that. We should demand government do the same thing.
One thing that I've heard from other lawmakers, mostly on the Democratic side, is they really want to expand Medicaid this time. Do you see an appetite on Republicans to do that?
No, because when you expand Medicaid, there's a cost to the state. So the government does not cover 100% of expanding Medicaid. So that would cost the state of Texas in our budget several $billions. So look, if members want to talk about expanding Medicaid, let's have that discussion, but they need to be transparent and tell us how much we're going to cut education and how much we're going to increase taxes if they really want to expand Medicaid.
I mean, they point to a Ray Perriman report that said it would benefit the state, that the state would still come out ahead. Have you seen that report?
Yeah, sure. I've seen the report. I'd like to visit the assumptions in that report because the reality is if you look at California, if you look at Colorado, if you look at Illinois, state after state that has expanded Medicaid, they have huge deficit problems where Texas really doesn't. Again, we have an $11 billion rainy day fund and we only have $1 billion deficit. If you look at California, $38 billion deficit. Colorado had to cut their education funding substantially. When you expand Medicaid, it's a huge budget impact. So, you know, we can look at these rosy predictions, but the reality is we can look at states and see what happens, and it isn't good.
Where are you on the issue of criminal justice reform? We spoke with several lawmakers who say that in the wake of George Floyd, what happened up in Minneapolis, there needs to be some changes here in Texas as well. Your thoughts?
Yeah, you know, my freshman year, I was actually served on the criminal justice committee. And actually, a lot of people don't realize it, but Texas is actually leader in criminal justice reform. We've been on the leading edge as far as reforming those that are nonviolent first-time offenders and getting them through programs versus serving time in prisons. We've actually shut prisons down in the state of Texas because we've seen a decrease in crime over the last decade or so. And so with respect to police and policies, we're certainly going to have that debate. We want the citizens of Texas to know that law enforcement is on their side. They're sacrificing themselves and their families to serve us. But certainly we're going to look and see if there's any improvements that we can make. I've had several discussions with our municipal police associations, sheriff associations. And look, we have great law enforcement. I love them. I respect them. But yeah, we're going to visit that and see if there's any improvements that we can make from a legislative perspective.
And is there any other issue that is a priority for you this session?
You know, I think what we'll look at, in addition to the economy and the budget, right? I think we'll look at the powers of the governor and then also local elected officials with respect to disasters. See if those need to be revisited at all. I have a bill that I've filed has more to do with religious freedom in that we witnessed throughout the state, but throughout the nation, that quite frankly, there's some governors and mayors that abuse their powers and targeted religious institutions. There were synagogues in New York. There was churches in other states that were targeted and treated differently than the secular area. And we didn't have that problem, by the way, in the state of Texas. The Governor Abbott recognized early and made it clear that churches and other faith institutions in the state of Texas are priority and they're essential, and they are. My legislation that I've filed just makes sure that it's codified in law that the state or no local government can shut down a church or any faith institution under any circumstances. I strongly believe that needs to be in state statute.
And just on the topic of what the governor's powers should be during an emergency such as a pandemic, do you think that the legislature should be called in at a certain point?
You know, that's one of the scenarios out there, one of the proposals. I'll have to take a look. I think the idea of having the legislature come at a certain period of time might make sense. I've got to look and see how the parameters of that work. In other words, what would be the triggers as far as bringing the legislature into session? Because a lot of times the reality is what the type of emergencies that Texas is going to handle is hurricanes, is tornadoes. God willing, we won't have another pandemic for over 100 years.
So true. And let me just ask you with regards to redistricting, you mentioned it, that is the other issue besides the budget that will have to get done this year. How confident are you that it will be done during the regular session, or if there will need to be a special session? And there are obviously going to be, Democrats are going to want fair representation and Republicans say, hey, look at the election results. So where do you come out on all this?
The redistricting process is going to be very open and it's going to be very fair. It's going to be very transparent. Those pieces are really important to that whole process. It's highly unlikely that we will do it during the regular session. My expectation is that the earliest we won't get the data till April from the federal government, if not later than that. So the reality is most likely we're going to have a special session to finish redistricting.
State Representative Matt Shaheen, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. Stay safe.
Thanks, Jack. You too.
All right, take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks again. Really appreciate it. I'll let you know when it'll be on. Your comments will be on today.
Awesome. You take care, Jack.
You too. Take care. Thanks again.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.